The scream cut through the summer air like a blade, not mine, but hers. Corinne's voice, the same one that had lectured me about property values and neighborhood standards for 3 years, now shrieked with genuine terror. I ran toward my backyard, heart hammering, already knowing what I'd find, her kids in my pool. What I didn't expect was the 4-foot water snake coiled on the diving board, its body glistening in the afternoon sun, positioned between those trespassing children and the only way out. Karma, I thought, doesn't always wait for an invitation. Sometimes it slithers in uninvited, just like they did. Marcus Webb stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug suspended halfway to his lips, watching the Henderson twins scale his fence for the 3rd time that week. The ceramic mug was warm against his palms, a stark contrast to the cold fury building in his chest. He'd purchased this house 18 months ago, a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a pristine kidney-shaped pool, specifically for the peace and quiet. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Not again," he muttered, setting the mug down with more force than necessary. The coffee sloshed onto the granite countertop, forming a small brown puddle that perfectly mirrored his mood. Through the window, he could see them clearly. Jackson, the 10-year-old with his father's entitled smirk, and Madison, his 8-year-old shadow who followed every poor decision he made. They dropped into his yard with practiced ease, their laughter carrying on the breeze like an insult. Jackson was already pulling off his shirt, revealing the pale skin of a kid who spent more time indoors gaming than outside living. Marcus pushed away from the counter and headed for the back door. His bare feet slapped against the hardwood floors with purpose. He'd tried being nice. He'd tried being reasonable. He'd even tried talking to their mother, Corinne Henderson, the self-appointed queen of the Willow Creek HOA and the bane of his existence since the day he'd moved in. That conversation had gone exactly as poorly as expected. "Mr. Webb," she'd said, standing on his porch 3 months ago with her arms crossed and her lips pursed in that perpetual expression of disapproval she seemed to have perfected. "Children need space to play. Your pool is clearly visible from our property, and frankly, I think it's cruel to have such an amenity and not share it with the neighborhood kids." "It's my property, Mrs. Henderson," Marcus had replied, keeping his voice level despite the irritation bubbling beneath the surface. "And my insurance. If something happened to your kids in my pool without supervision, I'd be liable." "That's what's wrong with society today," Corinne had sniffed, her pearl necklace catching the sunlight. "Everyone's so worried about being sued instead of being neighborly. In my day, we shared everything." "In your day, people also respected boundaries," Marcus had countered. "Please keep your children out of my yard." That had been 3 months ago. 3 months of the Henderson twins treating his property like their personal amusement park. 3 months of finding wet towels on his deck, pool toys floating in his water, and his gate left open despite the lock he'd installed, which Jackson had apparently learned to pick from a YouTube video. Now, as Marcus stepped out onto his deck, the afternoon sun beating down on his shoulders, he found himself face to face with the twins once again. They froze mid-cannonball preparation, Jackson's arms already raised above his head, Madison's feet positioned at the pool's edge. "Out," Marcus said. The word came out flat, devoid of negotiation. "Come on, Mr. Webb," Jackson whined, lowering his arms but not moving toward the fence. "It's like 90 degrees out. Our pool is still being installed." "That's not my problem, Jackson." Marcus crossed his arms, mirroring the posture he'd seen Corinne adopt countless times. "This is the 3rd time this week. I've asked nicely. I've talked to your mother. I've even put a lock on the gate, which you broke into." "I didn't break it," Jackson protested. "I just figured out the combination." "That's still trespassing." Madison, who had been silent until now, looked up at Marcus with wide eyes that might have been convincing if he hadn't caught her throwing rocks at his garden gnomes last week. "Please, just for a little while. Mom's having one of her meetings and she said we had to stay outside." "Then stay in your own yard." Marcus stepped closer to the pool, his presence making his message clear. "Now, out." The twins exchanged glances, and Marcus saw the exact moment Jackson decided to push back. The kid's jaw set in a way that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of Corinne herself, that stubborn refusal to accept that the world didn't revolve around their wants. "You can't make us," Jackson said, and before Marcus could respond, the kid jumped into the pool, sending a cascade of water splashing across the deck. Madison followed a second later, their laughter echoing off the privacy fence Marcus had specifically built to avoid situations exactly like this one. Marcus stood there, water dripping from his t-shirt, feeling his blood pressure spike. He pulled out his phone and did the only thing he could think of. He started recording. If Karen wanted to play games, he'd have evidence. He'd document every instance of trespassing, every violation of his clearly stated boundaries, and if necessary, he'd take it to the HOA board or even the police. "I'm calling your mother," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly over their splashing. "Go ahead," Jackson shouted back, floating on his back in the center of the pool. "She'll just tell you to stop being so uptight." Marcus was already dialing. The phone rang twice before Karen's voice came through, clipped and impatient. "Marcus, I'm in the middle of a meeting." "Your kids are in my pool again, Karen." There was a pause, filled with the sound of muffled conversation in the background. Marcus could picture her perfectly, sitting at her dining room table with the other HOA board members, probably discussing some new ridiculous rule about mailbox colors or approved flower varieties. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Karen sighed. "They're children, Marcus, it's summer. Can't you just let them swim for an hour?" "No, Karen, I can't, because they're trespassing, because I've asked them repeatedly to stay out of my yard, because—" "You know what your problem is, Marcus?" Karen's voice had taken on that condescending tone that made his teeth grind. "You're selfish. You bought this house with that enormous pool, and you don't even use it. You're sitting there in your bachelor pad, hoarding resources that could bring joy to children, and for what? So you can have your precious solitude." Marcus felt something snap inside him. 18 months of dealing with Karen's passive-aggressive comments, her HOA violations for minor infractions like his grass being a quarter-inch too long, her constant criticism of his landscaping, his paint choices, his refusal to participate in the neighborhood's mandatory Christmas decoration contest. All of it came rushing back. "You know what, Karen? This isn't about the pool. This is about you being incapable of teaching your kids to respect other people's property. This is about you using your position on the HOA board to bully people who don't fall in line with your suburban fantasy. This is about you being—" The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone, breathing hard. Behind him, the twins had gone quiet, their swimming paused as they'd clearly overheard at least his side of the conversation. He turned back to them, ready to demand they leave once more, when he saw Jackson's expression, not fear or embarrassment, but calculation. "Mom's gonna be so mad at you," the kid said, smirking. "You shouldn't have talked to her like that." Before Marcus could respond, both kids swam to the ladder and climbed out, grabbing their scattered clothes from his deck chairs. They didn't say another word as they hoisted themselves back over the fence, disappearing into their own yard with the ease of practice. Marcus stood alone in his backyard, surrounded by wet footprints and discarded pool toys that weren't his, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. He knew what came next. Karen would show up, probably with witnesses, ready to paint him as the unreasonable neighbor. She'd twist the narrative, make it about him being cruel to children rather than about her kids repeatedly violating his property rights. He needed a plan. Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon researching. He pulled up the HOA bylaws, looking for anything about property rights and trespassing. He called his insurance company to confirm what he already knew, that he would be liable if the Henderson kids got hurt in his pool. He even called a lawyer friend from college who practiced in property law. "Document everything," his friend advised. "Photos, videos, written complaints. If she's on the HOA board, you need a paper trail that shows you've been reasonable and they've been the aggressors." By the time the sun started its descent toward the horizon, Marcus had a folder full of evidence. Photos of the twins in his pool from previous incidents, screenshots of text messages where he'd asked Karen to control her kids, even ring camera footage showing Jackson picking the lock on his gate. He was uploading the latest video from today when his doorbell rang. Marcus didn't need his ring camera to know who it was. He could feel Karen's presence like a disturbance in the force. Taking a deep breath, he walked to the front door and opened it. Karen Henderson stood on his porch, flanked by two other HOA board members, Doug Peterson and Sheila Martinez. All three wore matching expressions of stern disapproval, like a tribunal assembled to pass judgment. "Marcus," Karen began, her voice dripping with false civility, "we need to talk about your behavior this afternoon." "My behavior?" Marcus leaned against the doorframe, keeping his own voice level. "Let me guess, this is about me asking your children to leave my property." This is about you verbally abusing me on the phone while I was conducting official HOA business, Karen corrected, her chin lifting. Doug and Sheila both heard your raised voice through my speaker. The language you used was completely inappropriate. Marcus noticed the phone in Karen's hand, positioned just so that she could easily start recording. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a performance designed to create evidence she could use against him. I raised my voice because your children were trespassing in my pool for the third time this week, Marcus said carefully. I have video evidence if you'd like to see it. Those children weren't hurting anyone, Sheila interjected. She was a kindly-looking woman in her 60s who'd always seemed reasonable before, but Marcus could see Karen had already poisoned the well. They were just trying to cool off on a hot day. On my property, without my permission. The HOA bylaws specifically mention community spirit and neighborly cooperation, Doug added. He was a large man who took his position as HOA treasurer far too seriously. Section 7, subsection C states that residents should strive to create a welcoming environment for all neighbors, especially children. Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. You're seriously trying to tell me that the HOA bylaws override private property rights? We're telling you, Karen said, stepping forward slightly, that your antisocial behavior is becoming a problem for this neighborhood. You refuse to participate in community events. You don't attend HOA meetings. You've made no effort to integrate yourself into our community. And now you're yelling at children for wanting to use a pool that sits empty 90% of the time. It's my pool, Karen. And this is our neighborhood, Marcus, she smiled, but there was steel beneath it. I've already drafted a proposal for the next board meeting. We're going to discuss implementing a community pool access program for properties with pools larger than 400 square feet. Given that you have one of only 3 pools in the development, we feel it's only fair that you contribute to the community. Marcus felt his stomach drop. You can't force me to let people use my pool. We can certainly add it to the HOA covenant, Karen replied smoothly. With a majority board vote, which I'm confident we'll achieve, it becomes a binding requirement. Failure to comply would result in fines starting at $100 per day. That's insane. My insurance would never. The HOA would assume liability, of course. We draft appropriate waivers. Karen's smile widened. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to handle this matter more amicably. Perhaps you could simply be more flexible when children occasionally wander onto your property for a harmless swim. There it was, the real play. Karen didn't actually want a community pool program, she just wanted Marcus to cave, to accept her kids trespassing without complaint, to acknowledge her authority. Get off my property, Marcus said quietly. Excuse me. You heard me, this conversation is over. If the HOA wants to vote on some ridiculous pool sharing program, go ahead. I'll see you in court. He stepped back and began closing the door. You're making a mistake, Marcus, Karen called out, her voice losing its veneer of civility. You have no idea how much power the HOA has in this community. We can make your life very difficult. Marcus closed the door and stood in his foyer, heart pounding. Through the window, he watched the 3 board members retreat down his walkway, Karen's mouth moving rapidly as she no doubt strategized her next move. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You shouldn't have been so rude to Mrs. Henderson. Bad things happen to people who don't play nice. Marcus stared at the message, a chill running down his spine despite the warm evening. He screenshot the text and added it to his growing evidence folder. This was escalating faster than he'd anticipated. That night, Marcus barely slept. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling around him. Around 2 a.m., he heard voices outside, low and furtive. He crept to his window and peered out, but saw nothing in the darkness. The next morning, he understood what those voices had been doing. Someone had spray-painted "selfish asshole" across his garage door in bright red letters. His mailbox had been knocked over, the post snapped in half. And perhaps most disturbing, his pool, his carefully maintained, chemically balanced pool, had been filled with dozens of bottles of food coloring, turning the water a murky, dark green. Marcus stood in his driveway in his pajamas and bare feet, coffee forgotten on the kitchen counter, staring at the destruction. Neighbors were emerging from their houses, ostensibly to get their newspapers or check their mail, but really to gawk and whisper. He pulled out his phone and called the police. The responding officer was sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful. Vandalism is a crime, of course, but without cameras showing who did it, there's not much we can do. You said you suspect the HOA president. Or her kids, Marcus confirmed. They've been harassing me for months. Any proof? Marcus showed him the videos of the twins trespassing, the threatening text message, even the Ring camera footage from his front door showing Corinne's visit yesterday. The officer took notes, but didn't seem optimistic. I'll file a report, Mr. Webb, but honestly, this looks like a neighborhood dispute. My advice would be to try to work it out with the HOA board directly. Maybe attend a meeting, clear the air. After the officer left, Marcus stood in his garage, staring at the graffiti, feeling utterly defeated. He'd moved here for peace. He'd followed every rule, paid his HOA dues, maintained his property to code. And this was what it got him: vandalism, harassment, and threats. He spent the day cleaning. The garage door required industrial cleaner and several hours of scrubbing. The mailbox needed complete replacement. But the pool was going to cost hundreds to drain, clean, and refill. The food coloring had stained the liner, and he'd likely need to have it professionally acid-washed. While he worked, neighbors passed by. Some looked sympathetic. Most averted their eyes, not wanting to get involved. Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down stopped briefly, her elderly face creased with concern. I saw some teenagers running through yards last night, she offered quietly. Around 2 in the morning, I couldn't see their faces, but they were big kids, high school age maybe. Not the Henderson twins then, Marcus said, scrubbing at the garage door. Mrs. Chen shook her head. Corinne's kids are with her at the moment. I saw them at the community center pool this morning. But Marcus, be careful. Corinne has a lot of friends in this neighborhood, a lot of people who owe her favors. After she left, Marcus considered his options. He could move, cut his losses, and find somewhere else to live. But that felt like letting Corinne win. He could escalate, lawyer up, file a formal complaint, maybe even a restraining order. But that would take time and money he wasn't sure he wanted to spend. Or he could wait. The thought crystallized slowly. Corinne had overplayed her hand. She'd gone from annoying HOA president to criminal vandalism, or at least, whoever she got to do her dirty work had. All Marcus needed was proof. And eventually, people who thought themselves untouchable always made mistakes. So Marcus cleaned his property, filed his police report, and began setting up additional security cameras, not just at the front door, but covering his entire backyard and the approaches to his house. If Corinne or her proxies came back, he'd have them on video. 3 days passed in tense silence. Marcus worked from home, his home office window providing a clear view of the Henderson house. He watched Corinne's routine: the morning departure for the gym, the afternoon HOA business meetings at various neighbors' houses, the evening family dinners on their back patio. The twins were easier to track. They played in their yard, occasionally glancing at his fence with obvious longing. The weather had turned brutally hot, the kind of muggy, oppressive heat that made the thought of cool pool water almost irresistible. On the 4th day, Marcus saw workers at the Henderson house. They were carrying equipment into the backyard, pool installation equipment. He'd forgotten that Corinne had mentioned their pool was being installed. That afternoon, he heard raised voices from next door. Through his open window, Corinne's shrill anger carried clearly. What do you mean another 2 weeks? You said it would be done by this weekend. The contractor's reply was too low to hear, but Corinne's response was not. This is completely unacceptable. My children have been suffering in this heat because our neighbor is too selfish to share his pool, and now you're telling me they'll have to wait even longer. Marcus closed his window and turned up his music, let her stew. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Marcus sat on his deck with a beer, finally allowing himself to relax. His pool had been professionally cleaned that morning, the water crystal clear once again. The new cameras were up and running, recording continuously to cloud storage. He'd even got a quote from a lawyer about pressing charges for the vandalism if any evidence emerged. He was checking his phone, scrolling through the camera feeds when a notification popped up. Motion detected at the back fence. Marcus switched to live view and felt his blood run cold. Jackson Henderson was at the fence again, but this time he wasn't alone. He had Madison and 2 other kids Marcus didn't recognize, slightly older, maybe 12 or 13. And this time, Jackson wasn't trying to be sneaky. He was carrying a bolt cutter. Marcus burst from his chair, the beer bottle falling and shattering on the deck. He yanked open his back door just as the kids dropped into his yard, Jackson already tossing the bolt cutters back over the fence. "Get out," Marcus shouted, running toward them. "Now." But Jackson just laughed, that same entitled smirk plastered across his face. "Make us, old man." The four kids ran for the pool, and Marcus realized with dawning horror what they were planning. This wasn't just trespassing anymore. This was deliberate, brazen, and probably being recorded by Karen from her own backyard as evidence that Marcus was denying access to children. Marcus's foot hit the wet spot from his spilled beer. Everything happened in slow motion. His feet slipped out from under him, the deck rushing up to meet his back with brutal force. Pain exploded through his spine, his head cracking against the wood. Stars burst behind his eyes. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard splashing. Laughter. The kids had made it to the pool. Marcus tried to get up, but his body wasn't cooperating. The world spun sickeningly. He managed to roll onto his side, fumbling for his phone, which had skittered across the deck. His fingers closed around it just as he heard the scream. Not a playful scream, not laughter, this was pure primal terror. Marcus forced himself to his hands and knees, head pounding, vision swimming. He looked toward the pool and froze. There, coiled on his diving board with the casual confidence of a creature in its element, was a snake. It wasn't huge, maybe 4 feet long, but in the golden evening light, its scales gleamed with an oily sheen. A water snake, probably harmless, but the kids didn't know that. And they were trapped. The 4 children huddled at the far end of the pool, in the deep end, clinging to the side. The snake hadn't moved from the diving board, which was positioned at the only easy exit point with the ladder. The other option was climbing out on the far side where the pool met the fence, a difficult scramble in the best circumstances. "Don't move," Marcus called out, his voice thick. He pushed himself to his feet, swaying, pain shooting through his back with every breath. Madison was crying, her small face pale with terror. Even Jackson had lost his smirk, his eyes wide and fixed on the snake. "Mr. Webb," one of the older kids, a girl with blonde braids, whimpered, "Please help us." Marcus took a step toward the pool, and the snake's head swiveled toward him. It was aware of all of them, evaluating, deciding whether they posed a threat. "Nobody panic," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice calm despite the throbbing in his skull. "It's just a water snake. They're not aggressive unless—" His words were cut off by another scream, this one coming from beyond the fence. Karen's voice shrill with panic. "Madison, Jackson, what's happening?" "Mom," Madison sobbed. "There's a snake, help." Marcus heard scrambling on the other side of the fence. Karen trying to climb over, her progress marked by cursing and the sound of wood creaking under her weight. "Stay there, Karen," Marcus called out. "You'll spook it." But Karen Henderson had never listened to Marcus before, and she wasn't about to start now. Her head appeared over the fence, her face red from exertion, her perfectly styled hair disheveled. Her eyes found the snake, and her expression transformed from anger to horror. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Get away from my children." "Karen, it's just a—" But Karen was already heaving herself over the fence, her gym-toned arms straining. She dropped into Marcus's yard with surprising grace and immediately charged toward the pool, all maternal instinct and zero rational thought. "No," Marcus lurched forward, trying to intercept her, but his injured back protested violently. He stumbled, nearly falling again. Karen grabbed a pool net from the deck, the long-handled kind meant for skimming leaves, and brandished it like a weapon as she approached the diving board. The snake, which had been relatively calm until that moment, reacted to the sudden movement. Its body tensed, coiling tighter, its head rising slightly in a defensive posture. "Get away from the pool, Karen," Marcus managed to reach her, grabbing her arm. "You're making it worse." She whirled on him, eyes blazing. "This is your fault. Your selfish, antisocial behavior put my children in danger. Your children trespassed onto my property again, and now there's a snake because you—" Whatever Marcus was about to say died as Karen shoved past him, raising the pool net. She swung it at the snake like a bat, clearly intending to knock it off the diving board. She missed. The net's pole hit the diving board with a hollow thunk, and the snake, now definitely agitated, slithered off the board, directly into the pool. The children's screams reached a new pitch. They scrambled frantically, trying to climb out on the far side where the pool met the fence, but the wall was slick and offered no handholds. Madison went under briefly, her arms flailing, before Jackson grabbed her. Marcus didn't think. Despite his injured back, despite his anger at Corinne and her kids, despite every reasonable voice in his head telling him that this wasn't his problem, he dove into the pool. The water was shockingly cold after the heat of the day. Marcus's head went under, and for a moment the muffled chaos was almost peaceful. Then his training kicked in, the lifeguard certification he'd earned in college, the water safety courses he'd taken when he first got the pool. He surfaced near the kids, positioning himself between them and where he'd seen the snake enter the water. "Ladder," he commanded, pointing. "Now, calmly." "But the snake," the blonde girl started. "Is more scared of you than you are of it," Marcus finished. "Move slowly, don't splash." He helped guide them toward the ladder, keeping his eyes on the water. He spotted the snake almost immediately. It had swum to the shallow end and was now attempting to climb out near the steps. Smart creature, actually. It just wanted to escape. Jackson reached the ladder first, scrambling up with none of his usual swagger. Madison followed, then the other two kids. As soon as they were out, they ran for the fence, hoisting themselves over with the desperation of prey escaping a predator. Marcus waited until they were all safely over before he swam to the side himself. His back was screaming now, every movement sending jolts of agony down his spine. He pulled himself out of the pool with arms that shook from more than just exertion. Corinne stood on his deck, her expensive yoga pants and designer top soaked, her phone in her hand. She was recording. "You," she said, her voice shaking with rage, "endangered my children. You saw them in danger and you did nothing to help." Marcus stared at her, water dripping from his clothes, pain radiating through his body. "Your children broke into my property, Corinne, using bolt cutters. I have it on video." "They're children. They're criminals in training." The words burst out of Marcus with all the pent-up frustration of 18 months. "And you've enabled every single behavior. You've taught them that rules don't apply, that other people's property is theirs to use, that no means nothing. How dare you?" "No, how dare you?" Marcus took a step forward and Corinne actually flinched. "You've harassed me since the day I moved in. You've used your position on the HOA to try to bully me into compliance. You had my property vandalized. Yes, I know it was you, or at least someone you put up to it. And now your kids break into my yard with bolt cutters, and you have the audacity to blame me when nature intervenes." "I'll have you arrested," Corinne sputtered. "I'll have you thrown off your own property. The HOA will." "The HOA will see every video I have," Marcus interrupted. "Every instance of trespassing, every threatening message, the vandalism, your kids using bolt cutters to destroy my lock, all of it. And then we'll let the police sort out who's really at fault here." For the first time since Marcus had met her, Corinne Henderson looked uncertain. Her phone, still recording, wavered slightly in her hand. "Get off my property, Corinne," Marcus said quietly, "and take your kids' bolt cutters with you." He pointed to where Jackson had dropped them next to the fence. "Evidence." Corinne's face cycled through several expressions: anger, fear, calculation. Finally, she settled on cold dignity. She picked up the bolt cutters, tucked her phone into her pocket, and walked to the fence. She pulled herself over with difficulty, her wet clothes making the climb awkward. Just before her head disappeared, she looked back at Marcus. "This isn't over." "No," Marcus agreed, his hand pressed against his lower back. "I don't think it is." After she was gone, Marcus stood alone in his backyard, dripping and hurting, his pool still containing one very confused water snake. Around him, he could hear the neighborhood coming alive, doors opening, voices calling out, the inevitable gossip machine starting to grind. His phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number: "You're going to regret this." But as Marcus looked down at his phone, he noticed something else. His security cameras had captured everything. Every moment of Corinne's trespassing, her assault on the snake with the pool net, her aggressive behavior toward him. Even better, the camera had a clear shot of the bolt cutters, still lying on the ground where Jackson had dropped them, a perfect piece of evidence. Marcus smiled despite the pain. Corinne had overplayed her hand again. This time there would be consequences. He limped inside to ice his back and begin uploading the videos. The snake, he noted, had finally found its way out of the pool and disappeared into the bushes. Smart snake. As the files uploaded to his secure cloud storage, Marcus drafted an email to the HOA board, copying the non-Karen members. He attached the relevant videos and laid out a timeline of harassment, vandalism, and trespassing. He ended with a simple statement: I will be pursuing legal action against anyone involved in the vandalism of my property and the repeated violations of my clearly expressed boundaries. I am also filing a formal complaint with local authorities regarding the use of bolt cutters to damage my lock, which constitutes felony-level property destruction. His cursor hovered over the send button. This was the point of no return. Once he sent this, the gloves were off. Karen would retaliate, he had no doubt about that. The HOA would take sides, the neighborhood would be divided. But Marcus had tried peace, he'd tried patience, he'd tried compromise. None of it had worked. He clicked send. As the evening deepened and the neighborhood slowly quieted, Marcus sat in his living room with an ice pack against his back, watching the cameras on his phone. The Henderson house was lit up like a Christmas tree, shadows moving frantically behind the windows. He could only imagine the conversation happening over there. His doorbell rang at 9 p.m. Marcus checked the Ring camera before answering. 2 police officers stood on his porch, looking official and slightly uncomfortable. This was faster than he'd expected. He opened the door, still damp from the pool, the ice pack obvious against his back. Marcus Webb, the older officer asked. That's me. We've received a complaint from a Karen Henderson regarding an incident involving her minor children and allegations of negligence and endangerment on your part. Marcus had expected this. Come in, officers. I think you'll want to see the security footage. As he led them inside, Marcus caught sight of Karen watching from her window across the street, her phone pressed to her ear, no doubt calling her lawyer or her HOA board allies or both. The war had officially begun. And somewhere in Marcus's bushes, a water snake, the unlikely catalyst for all of this chaos, curled up for the night, completely unaware of the mayhem it had caused. Officer Patricia Mendoza sat in Marcus's living room, her notepad balanced on her knee, watching the security footage for the 3rd time. Her partner, a younger man named Chen, stood behind the couch, arms crossed, his expression growing darker with each replay. So let me get this straight, Mendoza said, pausing the video at the moment Jackson Henderson dropped into Marcus's yard with bolt cutters clearly visible in his hand. These kids have been trespassing repeatedly. You've documented it. You've spoken to their mother multiple times, and tonight they came equipped with tools to destroy your property. That's correct, Marcus confirmed, adjusting the ice pack against his back. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving him with a throbbing pain that radiated down his legs. He probably needed to see a doctor, but that could wait. This couldn't. Chen leaned forward, pointing at the screen. And Mrs. Henderson, she came onto your property and... What exactly was she trying to do with that pool net? I think she was trying to hit the snake, Marcus replied, which only made the situation more dangerous. The snake was calm until she startled it. Mendoza exchanged glances with her partner. Marcus had dealt with enough cops in his life, parking tickets, a noise complaint once from a party that got out of hand in his 20s, to recognize that look. They believed him. Mr. Webb, I'm going to be honest with you, Mendoza said, closing her notepad. Mrs. Henderson called 911 claiming you endangered her children by allowing them to encounter a dangerous snake in your pool. She's demanding we charge you with child endangerment and criminal negligence. Marcus felt his stomach drop. What? However, Chen interjected quickly, after seeing this footage, it's clear that her children were trespassing. The bolt cutters alone constitute felony criminal mischief, destruction of property with tools. That's a serious charge, especially for minors. We're going to need copies of all this footage, Mendoza added. Every video you have showing the trespassing, the vandalism from earlier this week, everything. We'll also need statements from any witnesses. Marcus nodded, already pulling up his cloud storage on his laptop. I have everything time-stamped and organized. The graffiti on my garage, the food coloring in my pool. I don't have video of who did it, but I can show you the damage and the police report I filed. As he worked on burning the footage to a USB drive, his phone rang. Karen's lawyer. Marcus let it go to voicemail, but the notification that a message had been left made Mendoza raise an eyebrow. "That's the third call you've ignored since we got here," she observed. "Corinne's lawyer," Marcus explained. "Or her HOA board members. They've been calling nonstop since I sent them the email." "What email?" Marcus showed them. Mendoza read it carefully, then looked at him with something approaching respect. "You've been thorough." "I'm a software engineer," Marcus said with a slight smile. "Documentation is kind of my thing." Chen laughed, but Mendoza remained serious. "Mr. Webb,